Hello, Culture Matters Podcast. Before I introduce you to my co host for this series, here's a quote just for this episode. There isn't a single behavior or event that can be understood without considering the whole context. Dr. Iain McGilchrist. The one and only Nathan Merrill is joining me today for a multi-part series on Dr. Iain McGilchrist and at least three of his, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm holding them up, three of his books, The Matter with Things, Volume 1 and 2, and The Master and His Emissary. And we'll see where this goes from here. And the goal is to prepare for an upcoming encounter with this seems to be monumental thinker that we'll go into on the Culture Matters podcast. And there's no better co-host for this for the preparation of this than I think Nathan Merrill. If you haven't listened to Nathan on the Culture Matters podcast, go check him out. Just type in the Culture Matters podcast, Nathan Merrill, and you'll see a cohort of episodes navigating philosophy and psychology and culture, even business, and much more. Nathan, thanks for coming on the Culture Matters podcast and endeavoring to discuss and discover, or I guess attend to and comprehend the matter of things. Dr. McGilchrist.
Yes, I see what you did there. And the real question is what type of attentional model will we bring to the table in this discussion? Um, it's very intimidating. A lot of times you and I, we just kind of freelance, freelance uh, dialogue and discussion. So for us to direct our thoughts toward a specific work is intimidating. It really, it really we shall see, how this goes. It will put on display for all the true nature of you and I's both our, well, at a very basic level, our reading comprehension. How well can we read and comprehend what we're reading? And then philosophically beyond that, it's like, can we even comprehend a book of this magnitude, volumes of this magnitude? And beyond that, do we have anything of contemporary value or contemporary cultural value to add? I tend to focus more on the philosophical implications, the psychological implications, but I suppose the nature of the conversation would point it toward a contemporary cultural application and value.
When did you first come in contact with The Master and His Emissary, written by Dr. McGilchrist? And why do you think it's a book of significance that our listeners can buy and listen to and read on their own?
I don't remember the year. It was 2016 or 17, so it was really close to when it came out. Maybe it came out a few years before that. I don't quite remember. Um, Trying to think who it was. It had to have been Jordan Peterson or someone like that where I first heard the reference. Um, it's a phenomenal book. Basically, the thrust, I would say, of his work is the nature of attentional models and the nature of our own neurology, how the mind has a physiologically it's bifurcated, it's divided with a sort of a strange toll bridge, if you will, between them. And there's an asymmetrical divide between the hemispheres, which has all sorts of philosophical, scientific, evolutionary, I mean, psychological. The implications of the asymmetrical brain divide are really what Dr. McGilchrist's work is, as far as I perceive it, and I could be missing the boat entirely, but it seems like he's trying to draw a lot of attention to the direction that civilization is going in our attentional models and how we structure civilization, how we structure everything from the top down, um, in relation to how we view the world. And perhaps I think the implication of his work is that civilization is becoming skewed slightly in a more left brain analytical perception of reality, um, rather than a more integrated, holistic view of reality. You think that'd be accurate to say?
I want to read an excerpt and get your feedback on it. And I think, yes, well, could be the blind leading the blind here. I want the audience to keep in mind
Yep.
that we're reading the books now as we go, and this is the first of a handful of parts. So follow along with us as we move towards this interview with Dr. Iain McGilchrist on the Culture Matters podcast imminently. And that's the motivation behind doing this, is to learn, to grow, and to prepare for that opportunity for you as our listeners to continue bringing you people that could potentially change your lives like their literature has for Nathan and I. Here's an excerpt I want to get your feedback on. This is from the beginning of the Master and His Emissary. There is a story in Nietzsche that goes something like this. There was once a wise spiritual master who was the ruler of a small but prosperous domain, and who was known for his selfless devotion to his people. As his people flourished and grew in number, the bounds of his small domain spread, and with it, the need to trust implicitly the emissaries he sent to ensure the safety of its ever more distant parts. It was not just that it was impossible for him personally to order all that needed to be dealt with, as he wisely saw. He needed to keep his distance from and remain ignorant of such concerns. And so he nurtured and trained carefully his emissaries in order that they could be trusted. Eventually, however, his cleverest and most ambitious vizier, the one he most entrusted to do his work, began to see himself as the master and used his position to advance his own wealth and influence. He saw his master's temperance and forbearance as weakness, not wisdom, and on his missions on the master's behalf, adopted his mantle as his own. The emissary became contemptuous of his master, and so it came about that the master was usurped, the people were duped, the domain became a tyranny, and eventually it collapsed in ruins. The meaning of this story is as old as humanity and resonates far from the sphere of political history. I believe, in fact, that it helps us understand something taking place inside ourselves, inside our very brains, and played out in the cultural history of the West. And he goes on. So, the master and his emissary, I think, uh, why do you think he chose that story? And do you recall that from your readings, even 9 years ago or since?
Yeah, I mean, it's really the spirit of the work itself. Um, the asymmetrical brain imbalance has we anthropomorphize what's going on neurologically, but basically this story that he gives is laying out this idea that the part of our brains that evolutionarily have come online, right? We there's I'm not a neuroscientist, right? But there's parts of our brain that have come online earlier, later, the older and newer parts of the brain, that sort of thing. And something to do with this asymmetrical brain divide is very ancient, first and foremost, in the mind, but it also has caused our species to go in a direction that has somehow with the with the awakening of consciousness and our ability to grasp the graspability of reality. And I think that's a key concept. Our grasping of the graspability of reality is 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 done. It happens through certain channels of the mind. Now he does a great job of showing, and he would know, not me. This is just recounting what he says. Is the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere of the mind are actively involved in essentially all the things that we do. They're just telling different stories about reality. So The emissary is a representative. He's a delegate. He's doing things for the master. And in the book, The Master and His Emissary, he did a really good job of laying out how the master, which he would contend is the left hemisphere, the right hemisphere, which has a more completed, holistic view of reality, is kind of a behind the scenes controller, if you will. And so the emissary does what it wants. It has the ability to articulate and to manipulate and to grasp and to conceptualize and to zoom in on the atoms in a way that the more holistic side of the mind can do in certain aspects, but is not so concerned with. And because they have two different attentional modes or ways of being in reality, the emissary in the story is deceived into thinking that that way of attending to reality is somehow superior. Civilization, he ties a lot of this into really stories of biblical proportion, not necessarily biblical in their detailed reference, but just I mean in just the grandiosity of the story and the trajectory of civilization and culture and the species. So I think he chooses the story just to lay out this idea that um, there are different modes, ways of attending reality, and if you go too hard down this path of atomizing reality, slicing reality, using the tool as or using the mind as a tool to conceptualize, to atomize, to propositionalize, to make proposition out of everything, it's a very reductive way of viewing reality. Um, and I think all that it does over time, perhaps this is how he would say it or view it, is it serves to fragment us. And along with the fragmentation, we have ideological drive behind that. So the fragmentation coupled with ideological drive, it really serves to what feels like it serves to what feels like hurt our species and our the collective project of what we perhaps ought to be doing.
When you first read the book, what was it one that impacted you on a very deep level,
Um,
or did you just kind of go to the next one?
it impacted me on a deep level in the sense that uh, the how do I want to word this? I would say the past 15 years of my life has been a deeply intrapsychic journey for me. So a lot of the scientific notions of his book regarding how the mind works and operates, I think that you can intuitively come to many of these conclusions on your own if perhaps your mind is not, how do I want to word this? If you're not a hyper specialist, if your philosophical or transcendental or idealistic views toward reality are not hyper specialized, I think there are many intuitive lessons that you will find in his works that many people come to on their own. And so when you come across a thinker of this caliber, putting the technicalities to these lessons, it is highly impactful. It's it's a very validating thing. Not necessarily validating because you're looking to be right. It's validating because of the harmony and the resonance. You're resonating with thoughts that you have intuitively had. There are things that you've intuitively felt. There's things about reality that you've wondered and you've postulated and pondered upon. And so then you get a man, uh, to use very brutish language about it, you and I are very uncredentialed when it comes to many of these intellectual type things. So much of how we've gone about it has been very autodidactic, or we've just gone about things in such a I don't want to say a messy, but just a not chronologically rigorous. We're very exploratory. We just kind of go into the things that interest us, and uh, I I've had a very non-traditional intellectual path when it comes to ideas and that sort of thing. So long answer short, it did have a major impact on me, not because I thought the things that I were reading were view shattering. For many, I think they would be view shattering, but simply because they were articulated so well. And they were articulated well in a way that I thought, well, it's not something that I ever got in school, or any of that kind of thing. It most certainly was not reductionistic. So it was highly impactful. Yes, impactful enough that years and years later, I still think about that particular book itself. And this is
Wow.
you go through hundreds and thousands of books, and a lot of them you just kind of discard because there's nothing really of value that you want to grasp that firmly. But his works are different. So yes, it was impactful, and I did really grab hold on a lot of the ideas.
I want to read the back just for our listeners to urge them to actually pick up The Master's Emissary and get started on that journey. This pioneering account sets out to understand the structure of the human brain, the place where mind meets matter. Until recently, the left hemisphere of our brain has been seen as the rational side, the superior partner to the right. But is this distinction true? Drawing on a vast body of experimental research, Iain McGilchrist argues that while our left brain makes for a wonderful servant, it is a very poor master. As he shows, it is the right side which is the more reliable and insightful. Without it, our world would be mechanistic, stripped of depth, color, and value. This book came out in 2009.
Okay.
The book and the two volumes that we're going to explore in this series as well, which will be topic of conversation when the doctor begins to participate in the Culture Matters podcast. This magnum opus here, I believe, came out in 2021. If you're watching on YouTube, The Matter with Things, Volume 1 and Volume 2 will be exploring. From my understanding, some research, his publisher actually was urging him to write a smaller,
Hmm.
more popularizable or accessible book as a continuation or a next book from the Master and His
Hmm.
Emissary, which is roughly 400 and some odd pages. Yeah, 450 pages or so. And in the midst of actually trying to execute on that ask, this 1,500 page book. This was his attempt to actually make the idea more accessible and shorter. It became much, much, much longer and more elaborate, to your point earlier about what's really in the matter with things. I'm curious for your thoughts on that before we go into. So they were asked him to make a more popularized or accessible book
Hmm.
as a sequel to The Master and His Emissary to cover this topic. And out came 10 years later, this the bibliography alone is 180 pages, and I'm just barely started it. So it a Herculean task to get in. But yeah, instead this came out. How does something
I
like that even happen?
um I suppose it depends on the type of urges that we follow. Um, it's an interesting. There's sort of an irony in that when you consider the left brain, right brain, kind of what they're going about doing. He it seems like a very logical proposition to go about doing it in that way. The urge or the thing within you that would never tell you to stop, but would always tell you to expand and expand and expand and add and add and add. You're adding more and more logical proposition. So that that's almost like it's a work of. It's funny because it's the master and his emissary symbolism. There's kind of holds true. It's like, okay, if the emissary thinks that it knows everything, let us exhaust it. puke out everything that you know in as much detail as you can. And if that's done, then when it's done, it was still the task of the master. The master was the one that kind of was pulling the strings to get that sort of thing done. And who knows? It's very complex when you think about it, because that's the mind of one man. That's one man's ideas expanded upon. A very additive process. It's very complex, but relative to what reality is, it's not actually that complex. It would just be a drop in a bucket of attending to reality in such a way that you were going to model it atom for atom. If we were to be atomistic about it, it's just a drop in a bucket. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of ironies wrapped up in that. The fact that his editor wanted something simple, popularizable, and this is what he came back with. I can relate to that because I have the type of mind that also the emissarial, is that a word? The emissarial part of my brain is definitely thinks that he's running the show. But I like the quote though uh, that you read just before that, where he was talking about rationalism and logic and that sort of thing. The if I really were to summarize the counterintuitive, kind of ironic nature of his work, it's showing the pitfalls and the shortcomings of rationalism, reductionism, the really the outcomes of how science works or a scientific mind works. Um, but he's doing it in this hyper expanded method, which is ironic, in the spirit of what his work is about. You know, on the opposite side of that, it's saying all the things that the Zen writers would say that could not be said. It's like, okay, the emissary will teach you the nature of Zen. Well, the nature of Zen cannot be taught. So for the emissary to do that, he can't ever stop talking. So if 1,500 pages is not enough, it'd have to be 15,000 pages and just keep on going. Because that's the nature of the unexplainable. So that which is beyond rationalism, how do you articulate that which is beyond rationalism? Oh, it's an irrational process. Maybe sort of like the number pi.
I want to go back to this statement about conceptualizing, atomizing, propositionalizing. You were saying that that an argument is being made that it leads to, is it fragmentation, or and when you mix that with the ideological drives or
Mm-hmm.
impulses of our nature,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense, is that part of the argument that that's dividing us and making it harder for us to communicate and for community to occur?
Um, it's a two-edged sword because sorry, my brain's a little off today. Read back just the first part of that of what you wrote down of what I said.
One of the over conceptualize, or the conceptualizing, the atomizing, the propositionalizing. It's a, like
Yes,
the categorization,
yes.
the obsession with categorization and uh,
The mind is a tool, right? The mind is a perceptual tool. Uh, Let me rephrase that. The brain, the things that he's talking about, the nature of how the ontology of the brain, the structure of how the mind, the nature of how the mind and the brain works. I think we slightly have to differentiate between a few things. There's intelligence, there's consciousness, there's mind, and there's the brain. The brain is highly computational in nature. It's layers and layers of computational causal structures. It's really an engineering marvel. It's things that over time, a lot of the evolutionary biologists and scientists they claim, and once again, I'm not that smart when it comes to these things. You can sort of trace back the evolutionary fingerprints of how the different layers of the mind came about and how they're layered and how they interact. All of it though is this computational thing which is there to perceive. It's there to intake data. And what it does with the data is it models reality. So it helps us navigate reality. And along with that, it also helps us manipulate reality. So we navigate and we manipulate, and we also project. into reality. So we take parts of what is internally, we model, we structure internally, we map things out internally, and then we project out onto what is, and we manipulate and move things, and the ideas of physics and mathematics and engineering and all of these things are so that the layers of our mind, the causal integrated structures of our mind, which are taking the data in, can do something with it and can internally restructure so that we can externally restructure reality. To do that on an accurate level requires ever increasing tools of accuracy, and accuracy is relative. So we go back how many thousands of years, with this earth-shattering invention among human beings would be something like the wheel. It's very crude. It's a very crude what a computer scientist would say is like a coarse-grained thing. Computationally, it's not really that difficult to. Well, I take that back because the computational difficulty of things that are circular in nature um, is very philosophically deep. Uh, but we won't go necessarily into that at this point. Um, but things are coarse grained, and as they become more accurate, they become finer and finer tuned. And so the tools need to become finer and finer tuned. Okay. And so the language has to be increasingly complex. And okay, so then the thing I said about the ideological drives and the psychological aspect of it is where we also have biological drive. There's all of this unexamined aspect of our existence. So as we're playing language games and developing all these algorithmic ways to interpret data so that we can take that interpreted data, create maps, and then with those maps manipulate reality. While all of that is happening, there's these urges and these drives behind us, and these gods that we subconsciously and consciously worship, that it feels like the direction of reality is pulled by these different drives and urges. And so we bring all of that along with us as we use the brain, the mind, intelligence to fragmentate reality, to understand it and manipulate it. It's all connected to the why of things. Why are we doing that? It's like, why are we splitting atoms? Well, because we want to blow something up. And that's where things get philosophically interesting. And so, yeah, it's a two-edged sword because it becomes more difficult. As things become ever increasingly complex, answers become increasingly complex. Language is increasingly complex. But the urges and the drives that we have are still so they they're infinitely more complex, although the phenomenological experience of them is very brutish and coarse-grained and like in caveman-esque. But it's not that they are caveman-esque. It's a very Jungian thing. It's that they are the forces behind all of the fragmentation, all the atomizing and the reductionism, the fruits of rationalism and logic. I think maybe I answered that question, but I don't know that I quite probably could have said that in a much easier way to understand.
I'm going to read an excerpt here for you. In the introduction, the matter of things. Attention in the brain. Attention changes the world. How you attend to it changes what it is you find there. What you find then governs the kind of attention you will think it appropriate to pay in the future. And so it is that the world you recognize, which will not be exactly the same as my world, is firmed up and brought into being. What then is attention? Is it really just another cognitive function of that supposed machine, the brain? It's clearly something pretty special if it takes part in the creation of the only world we can know. Is it a thing? Hardly. Is it something we do? Nearer, but not exactly. Perhaps a manner of doing? or even a manner of being. The best way I could put it is that it is the manner in which our consciousness is disposed towards whatever else exists. The choice we make of how we dispose our consciousness is the ultimate creative act. It renders the world what it is. It is, therefore, a moral act. It has consequences. Love, said the French philosopher Louis Lavelle, is a pure attention to the existence of the other. Thoughts?
Um, well, there's a philosophical thread there that sort of traverses, if you will, thousands of years, hundreds of civilizations, ideological, transcendental ideas, philosophical ideas. It permeates the spirit of the scientific revolution. It permeates the spirit of romanticism. It permeates everything, and that is this idea of observation, awareness, attention. The language that we could use, like I said, it could be biblical. God in the beginning is creating, and after everything that He creates, it says, "And God saw, and God saw." And it says, "And God said," but also, "And He saw it that it was good." It says, "God said, let there be light," and God saw it that it was good. So He said it and He saw it. And what you have there is, you have, I think, symbologically, we have this bifurcated mind. It has sort of a dualistic symbolism to it, and the symbolism of dualism permeates everything. Um, Permeates the conversation, that it permeates conversation, it permeates everything. And I think that this idea of observation and attention, attention seems to be what all of the senses do. It is what the mind does. It is what everything does. Everything attends to something, no matter how you slice it up or examine it or look at it or articulate it. It's all different modes of attention. It's how things are in relationship to everything else. And he there's a Eastern thinker. His name was J. Krishnamurti, or Jiddu Krishnamurti, and Krishnamurti always put a um, heavy emphasis on the historical weight that we bring to our sensorial experience, and how that we have almost an utter incapability of alleviating ourselves of our historical complexity, so that the sensorial ability, the sensorial experience can be isolated. And so when it comes to attentional models and how we see things and how we attend to things, we'll take the eyes, for instance. There's so many different ways of looking at something with the eyes. 99% of the ways that I would say most people go about using the eyes, the sense of seeing something, is in a fashion that while attending with the eyes, they're also attending with all of the historical baggage that they bring with the ability
Mm.
to the sensory input and internalize it. And so I think this McGilchrist talks about this quite a bit when he talks about the different ways that the brains are viewing things. There is seeing to understand. There is seeing to see. I mean, there, you can hear to understand. You can hear to model. There's so many modes and ways that you can use your sensorial inputs, apart from they themselves, what they themselves can do. I mean, you have to ask the question: what is it to see and to see alone? What is it to taste and to taste alone? What is it to hear and to hear alone? And so you've got these tools of sense, and the tools of sense are so often wrapped up into language games. They're wrapped up into philosophical implication. They're wrapped up into conceptual implication, and they're very, very infrequently stripped away from those things, so that the phenomenological experience can be there on its own. And from that on its own, you can find the emergence of all sorts of states of consciousness, awareness, and modes of attending things. that's really what I appreciate about McGilchrist's book is he's really trying to take people by the back of the head gently and just kind of turn them so that they look at things differently. They attend reality in a different manner. Um, he also he mentioned in there about attending to see things for what they are and attention creating reality. Phenomenologically, that is the experience. The experience is only that. Reality is only that attention for you. And that's the important distinction that must be made to us individually. The reality is there for you to be modeled. It's always modeled in real time, moment to moment, if you will. Um, what it is apart from that it's all propositional theorizing. It's science, it's knowledge, it's idea, it's concept. Not that all of those things don't shape reality in the way that we experience it. They do, but they're not the a priori, I would say, experience. Um, Once again, I'm having a slightly off day here. I think I attended to what you're asking there, but I'm not actually positive that I did.
Is it if when you say seeing with our eyes, we're also seeing through our culture,
Exactly.
which has to do with the history behind us, the language we speak, the rituals that we participate in and have participated in throughout the tenure of our existence, and
Well,
when the symbols that represent the ideas that have shaped our existence, current and prior. And then there's the content and the context is the content has a relationship with our genetic proclivity, and the context our environment actual environment that we were stewed in. I'm trying, is that some of so when we see, we're not just seeing through, all of that is compressed in our attention. What am I missing?
all of it is compressed into our attention, yes. But there's a purity of attention still at the foundation of everything. That is, the eyes are always doing what the eyes are there to do. Awareness is always present. Awareness is never not present. Awareness is the thing that is the not presuppositional, but it is the it is the substrate. It is the unattended and ever present substrate. Awareness, I think, is probably
Okay.
we're in very deep water here, but this is why the
It's
symbolism
good.
becomes so powerful, and why this even Dr. Peterson in his work he put such a heavy emphasis on the focus of the eye and where the eye is and what the eye sees, and how that there's this. I like to think about reality in
But
well,
is there a gulf? There could be a gulf between what the eye sees and what we see and how we relate to the eye. We as
yeah,
in
yes,
self.
yes, well,
That's the
yes,
whole
because
thing, right? With truth and
right,
lies, is
right.
that gulf between what the eye sees and what the self can see, can be capable of seeing, how close to the structure of reality we as in the self actually are.
Yeah, well, the structure of reality itself, we can never actually finally attune ourselves to. What we have you read the books Donald Hoffman, any of his works? So Donald Hoffman, let me just pull up a couple of things here. He shows and lays out how that
Well, but
really
we don't necessarily, do we have to, is it, what if it's less about knowing reality where its limits versus, or absolutely coming in contact with reality versus just being closest to it relative to all of the other current potentialities that exist at any given point in time in whatever epoch. There's it's like there's a race to the closest
Right.
proximity of reality. 'Cause if it's relative, then we don't necessarily have to know reality.
Well,
Like
that so
currently
that
in this
language,
moment,
well, the language is kind of a catch-22 thing there because we are reality, right? And so the idea behind the examining these modes of attention and approaching experience of reality is not necessarily so that we can have a scientific understanding of it or even an experiential understanding of it. It's more, I think, so that you in your being are living in harmony with um well, how do we want to word this? I think it's so that the pedantic and the hyperlogical side of the mind does not fixate upon its own idols and think that the way that it is fragmenting and vigilantly slicing reality scientifically in this reductionistic manner so that it can manipulate and conquer it is so that we can alleviate the psychology of our collective angst in such a way that we recognize we're not beings that in any of the ways that we examine the structure of the mind, our physiology, our biology, our evolutionary history, any of that, none of that seems to me to point to us as being beings which ought to conquer reality. We're beings that play within reality in the play of all that reality is. And so when we're talking about like seeing through the eye without the historical, without the baggage, without all of the epigenetic and the genetic and cultural things that come along with that, I think the idea there is just simply so that we may experience what we are, and so that our ideas can be shaped from a this non-assumptive place that I must be chronologically or driven with this sort of Armageddon-esque psychology. It's like even when I'm reading Dr. McGilchrist, I don't necessarily like these takeaways that are grand summaries of the trajectory of civilization. I mean, they're helpful insights. They're helpful insights, I think, to help balance pockets of civilizations and cultures that do become overly whatever, I mean, stressed in this or that way. Um, but I think that even those are grand leaps of faith to say that this or that is happening when this or that process is taking place in the mind that's in balance or out of balance.
so the hourglass or the arrow of time is moving. Let's say it's moving forward, it, air quotes.
It's animated. The
And that's a good
existence is animated.
is one of the central themes we're moving away from play and towards fight, or like if that fight or flight, fight
Yes.
isn't that one of the central themes to this is that we're moving away from play
Hmm.
as one of the ironies of technological integration of consciousness
Right.
is we're moving away from play and closer to fight or flight,
Hmm.
which is which has the potential to implode
Right.
the partnership. I'm a little look. One of the things I think is from a metaphorical, you said talked about anthropomorphizing. I
Hmm.
think this is a way that I can maybe there's like some there's some business metaphors that I think can be helpful here. If the chief executive officer stops integrating through how they listen and tell the truth when they're not present physically, emotionally, spiritually, psychically in the company that they're responsible for, any of the other C-suite executives or so internally
Right.
can rise into that emissary, that Nietzschean proverb, or that Nietzschean allegory. Am I even And that happens often. If there's a disengaged chief, or externally there's a board and the CEO is not integrated in the organization,
Hmm.
maybe there'll be a hostile takeover, like externally, like and they'll vote the CEO out.
Hmm.
This right and left brain relationship is exemplary in that metaphor.
Right.
If so, for example, let's say look at Steve Jobs' career. Earlier on, he was voted out of his own business, and a managerial bureaucrat came in and was unintentionally undermining the shareholder value.
Right.
Steve, so there wasn't an alignment between the right and the left hemisphere. They weren't relating to one another in a meaningful way of value creation between order and chaos, or
There was an ethic in the culture, an unexamined ethic in the culture. There was a presuppositional ethic to the culture that allowed for that type of, even on an a microorganism level. Think about invasive bacteria, fungus, that sort of thing. There was a conducive culture which allowed for a certain type of cannibalistic competition to take place. And so when we're talking about these integrative processes, the value of these integrative processes is so that we fractally don't scale what nature, like nature in reality on its raw front edge is life and death. We're
mm,
insulated from it though, but we fractally bring these life and death things within civilization. And so the more that we're manipulating reality through the mind's ability to conceptualize and atomize, the more that we're bringing from nature a competitive thing of life and death that is there for the right biological and evolutionary reasons. We're bringing it into our isolated civilizational cultures in a way that, you're right, over time can cause the implosion of a civilization. And I think it's the misalignment of values. It's the misalignment of ideals, and it's not, our attentional models have mistaken play for war, and the focus of our psychic energy has, and our technological energy has become intrapsychic to the civilization. It's nationalism is a good example of this. And not, we don't have to get too philosophically political about it, but it's an excellent example of this. um, I was just talking with my wife about this the other day. War used to be such an absurd thing. You would go out to these fields dressed in these vibrant, just flamboyant colors, and you'd say all these ritualistic things so that you could stab someone and make them bleed. You know what I'm saying? It's
yeah.
such a strange. So there's a formality to it where we're bringing play into the raw dynamic of life and death, and that is what seems to be doing this, where it's inverting and it's flipping, so that now the realist things that we can manipulate with certain hemispheric abilities and scientific capabilities, well, what are we doing with them? We're not necessarily doing with them the things that would make play more enhanced. We're doing with them the things that make life and death even more gruesome and raw. Civilizationally internal, though, like we're bringing the competition of a lion in the savannah tearing a wildebeest apart. We are bringing that civilizationally internal. That's kind of the nature of war and all of that. And then even on a smaller scale, that's what we do in cultures within corporations and business and all that sort of stuff. And the lines become blurred between play and life and death.
Is it Whitehead is a recurring citation from McGilchrist,
Mm-hmm.
this Alfred North Whitehead.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And he there's a quote that Peterson will often reference in this in the Whitehead. Our ideas die so we don't have to.
Hmm.
Is it that, and in the business context, I've thought about it quite a bit. Our businesses compete and die so we don't have to.
Well, people conflate their identities, right?
Well, first in a nationalistic sense, the
Hmm.
nations compete over and with through trade and through
Hmm.
ideas. And if that exchange, as a consequence, that in theory, what there's less bloodshed, or it's the bloodshed. It's like there's is that part of the I guess what the chronological evolution of our species has been. We've moved from fighting and pillaging one another to trading and exchanging, and from that
Well,
enterprise. And but in a sense, oh, go ahead.
well, what's sad about our species is we take that as the presupposition, is that as the technological motivating force has been that. When in reality, the technological motivating force, and I think the motivating force of evolution itself, is the propagation of life. Is so that we as a species, and this is more kind of systems thinking on a broader fractal scale, um, life is much better for us now than it was 2,000 years ago. It, but it it all depends on our perspective concerning what our species is doing, why it's doing it. Like
Well,
our
wait, better for us in this, maybe in the context of living
physiologic,
longer, or not dying as much as a higher percentage of per capita for like random crazy suffering,
right?
intensely demonic or suffering deaths.
Well, all of
However,
those
not
things,
necessarily ourself. Our actual self might be less, the quality of life for the self might be less
psychologically,
fruitful, because
all pro-
was there even a self before there was a self? The self is like a newborn babe that isn't even walking yet. It's still being swaddled by this body sack that now is just living longer and is beginning to cry. It's like the self is crying in the is being cradled by the mother culture, and crying. What if our self is 30 days old? We're living longer as a species. We have less suffering per capita as a species, but our self, maybe we didn't have a self 2,000 years ago. We may, and we're just starting to have a self now, like the self is a new construction or something. And it's time, it's age. The age of the self is if I was gonna analogize it, is a baby. It's not yet even crawling. And and it's as if we have to shed our shed our skin, or the cocoon has to
right,
crack before the self even begins to fly. And
right.
is
The
this
con-
book an attempt to react to the cocoon not yet even cracking?
so I would say the concept itself has to become self-aware, right? So the concept of self, you're right. It could be a very immature idea. Let me just backtrack and say this: all problems before death are psychological. Life and death are the bounds of existence for a biological being. And so when I say life is better for us, I'm thinking my mind is viewing this as um, ultimate biological terms. Like, what is the aim of life? If I were to take a larger perspective on what life is doing, not just relative to the species of humanity, but life itself exists to perpetuate itself. And it seems that intelligence has emerged through life itself, maybe not emergent as in a genesis, but it has shown itself through life. If intelligence has the capacity to show itself through life, then there's something about the vehicle of life itself. There's something inherent to the vehicle of life itself that is conducive to what intelligence or mind or consciousness or awareness would like to do through that vehicle. And so when we look at the inherent nature of the vehicle, that's where I think we find epistemological barriers or conceptual barriers to what could be happening or going on ultimately. And so when I say life being better, I'm saying if we were to boil it down to what is the aim of a biological species, it's so the species may be perpetuated. Our civilizations are as insulated from nature, right? We are nature. That's the real that's the real catch there. But in terms of the way that we conceptualize and have this psychological framework which likes to separate us from the substrate, which is all illusion, our species is as insulated from the ravishes of life and death as nature would. Like if you didn't have a house and you just had to go live out where you'd be dead like real quick. So in that sense, life is as good as it has been. Now I don't want to get into all of the other things beyond that about statistics and crime and that. But the other things though, now we need to turn to the nature of psychological problem and psychological angst. I don't disagree. I agree entirely with you, but I don't think that the answer for a species is to become even more internal and to make those internal psychological problems realer than they are relative to what the broader thing that is happening is.
What would McGilchrist say to this?
What would he say to it? Um, well, I think in the book, that's what he's alluding to is I think he's alluding to the problems that we're talking about right now. But he's elucidating from us a reaction that would lead us to be more integrated in our being, right? In meditative holistic processes which allow us to piece back some of the fragmentation, to bring some of it back together.
I want to read. So the matter with things, which I'm. This is the for our first recording. My research up to this point is the introduction of Master and His Emissary. Nathan, you've read the Master and His Emissary. It's only part of why I asked you to come on the Culture Matters podcast and take me through Dr. McGilchrist's theories and um, talking points and some of his biography to your knowledge. Um, and I am the first. I'm through the introduction on the matter with things, volume one, which it says our brains, our delusions, and the unmaking of the world. Our brains, our
Yeah.
delusions, and the unmaking of the world. Which we'll talk about that in a second. This is volume one. I've got volume two here as well, and we'll talk. This is the introductory episode, so I hope we're this is where I hope we'd get to. Other than that, I've watched three interviews between Dr. the Gilchrist and Dr. Peterson, which I thoroughly enjoyed. It was like episode 168, 267, and 423. I think I hope I have those numbers. I think something like that. 460 on the Peterson podcast. All very enlightening. My studies outside of that, having read Maps of Meaning multiple times and having done the Beyond Order series now up to this point, which is an extrapolation or a practical
Mhm.
conceptualization of many of the lessons in Maps of Meaning. Now, Maps of Meaning, there's crossover, and I think that's part of what brought Peterson and McGilchrist together. Or there's some crossover. There are great differences in their work, and I'm still learning that and unpacking that myself. Now being brought into McGilchrist's theories and so on, and introduced in. But I want the audience to know just in some sense how, at least where I'm coming from in this journey, and bringing you in to having read the Master of His Emissary and generally your studies from your life and experiences and wisdom, I think would be really helpful for our audience and help me prepare for this first interview with Dr. McGilchrist. And who knows, hopefully he'll be a great friend of the show and come on with frequency, regularity, and we can have some great conversations with him together. That being said, then by the next time we do this, my intention is to be much have a much deeper experience in his really two books. It's more like three, but two books.
Mhm.
And I know you've been reading yourself on the matter within. So I do want to ask you about that. But there's one more thing I want to say is that I had the opportunity to meet what how this all occurred was I actually had the opportunity to meet Dr. McGilchrist in person in London at the Alliance of Responsible Citizenships annual gathering, completely, well, it's interesting because I saw him sitting, 4,000 people in this room, sitting in very unassumingly, no one talking to him at when the moment that he came into my attention. And I went up to him. I recognized him because I've had this book. There's a few thousand books in the house, but one we're next to the bed on the floor for a year and a half. And for years I've wanted to read this book. And I just went up to him. I said the truth. I told him the truth. I was kind of funny about it, but Dr. McGilchrist, like I recognized him. Uh, and I said the truth. I've had this book next to my bed, and I've been waiting for years to pick. Like I walk by it, with regularity. Tomorrow I'll read it. It's there's like this. I've been avoiding to read this book because I think I'm intimidation, overwhelmed with generally a lot of things, lot of rationalization, and I just was like I walked past it, and then he laughed, and then we ended up I bumped into him again and asked him, started a conversation. I would love, how did you get into this, and just gave him my attention.
Mhm.
Now him and Peterson say we our attention follows what we value. I, clearly value him and his literature. Uh, so much so I've been afraid of it. Haven't gone nearly as deep on the brain sciences as I would like, and maybe this is a catalyst to that. Um, um, but I had his attention in that conversation, I think, because he had mine. I was asking questions. I wanted to learn about him and his background and everything I could possibly. And what I learned was that he actually in his early 30s, he decided to go back to college for medicine. And because Oliver Sacks really deeply impacted him on a personal level. Oliver Sacks's work and that book, especially that book Awakening. And he went back for extra schooling to go into to learn the medicine. It's even more years of schooling. And we had a nice conversation. And um, my wife pushed me to ask him to come on the podcast because it didn't even come into my mind that would be something that to ask. So I went back over to him after we had stopped talking and told him about the show and asked him, and he was very polite and honest, and you know, reach out and maybe not based on travel schedules and responsibilities and so on. And so I followed his direction, and we have this opportunity, which I hope is a consequence of the show growing and the credibility developing and the brand of the show, Culture Matters. I think that it's on brand clearly with his his work and so on. So, in the spirit of the show, the purpose is to uncover the genius of our guest, the goal to make curiosity cool. We're preparing. So everyone that's listening to this, Nathan is helping me prepare for this first interview around this book. I haven't quite fully conceptualized how I want to go with the hour, right? There's only so much one can do in an hour, but there's also so much that one can do in an hour with attention. So Dr. McGilchrist has our attention right now. We're in the process of attending to him, his work, all of our listeners for this future interaction. Like, and relative in my mind, relative to preparation, how much I learn about him as a person, as a psychiatrist, as a medical doctor, as a theorist, a philosopher, a polymath, whatever, and about the actual work, I could do a better job inquiring and thinking with him. He'll have my full attention, and hopefully, as a consequence of that, the audience's attention, and maybe that that's creating value in some form or fashion. This show is about attention. How do you uncover the genius of the guest without attention, without attending to who they are and what they know and what they think they know, and so on? So I don't know, I just felt compelled to say all that. I think the context it can create clarity and excitement for our listeners and us, right? Because we're both investing time of our own
Hmm.
that we won't get back. We're giving him attention, and he's going to give us attention by showing up. And those that follow him and read his books may actually find us and the show. Their attention is on him. We have attention on us. We come together for this conversation. Now there's a multiplying effect of attention, but for what? And yeah,
Yeah.
so I guess we'll find out for what when we read this book. But it seems like his goal, and I'd want your feedback on this as we, move to the close on part one here, is like, is his goal, well, does he have a goal? That's number one. If so, what is it with this book? And why is this important for our listeners?
You want my feedback? I think you're writing something.
Yeah, what does he have a goal? If
Hmm.
he does, what is it? And why is this important for our listeners?
Hmm.
Like, why is this series even worth listening to?
Um, I think that an individual human being can live a very colorful and satisfying um well, this I would say is difficult for me to fully articulate because I struggle with all my own issues of internal angst. I've always had a lot of internal angst, so most of my philosophical inquiry has been uh not an effort to alleviate, but it's been animated. We were talking about the arrow of reality. um my efforts have always been animated by a curiosity that is both like exciting. It's an excitable curiosity, like I just like to know things, but it's also a curiosity connected with this kind of like angst. Like, yeah, I really want to know things because it's exciting, it's fun, and this is what the mind does. It pierces the veil, if you will. But there's also the intellectual curiosity that's just driven by an angst that's always been there for me. And works like Dr. McGilchrist I find deeply helpful because they alleviate an angst. When you realign your internal values, you mentioned, you attention goes to what you value. Um, Values are not as examined as people think. In the way that they behave, it's easy to speak with language in such a way that your decisions are in line with this or that value. But most of the time, logic does not necessarily follow propositional values as laid out on paper. They follow different things altogether. And I think that there's a more honest mode of being in the world, a more integrated mode of being in the world, if you will, when you read books like this and you expand the way that your mind attends to things, even if it's in the accumulation of knowledge and experience, it doesn't all have to happen in propositional ways. You can accumulate knowledge through other modes. You can accumulate experience through other modes and ways of being in the world. These type of works here, they show you those things. They show you that life is not all about appealing to authority figures. It's not all about the intellectual superior. It's not all about propositional superiority. It's not all about reductionistic binary outcomes. There's a complex richness to our experience that it's there. It's there, right there in front of all of us. Each reality is right there in front of you. There's ideas though that they cloud the experience of it. You know, you can go out at night and you can look at the stars. One of the technological disadvantages of an insulated society is we have no capacity to look up. And the
Mm.
symbolism of looking up and looking out is ancient. It's an ancient symbolism. It harkens back to what I was saying earlier about our species' inability to recognize their civilizational um, meta problems, problems within the culture, problems within the nature of how we conceive and conceptualize competition. There are internal problems that our species has, and they're fractal and they're like everything I say, they're fractal in nature. And so the individual being would do well to attend to books like this because they will help you feel your connectedness to larger systems and the larger reality that we're all a part of. And I don't know, I personally find a certain help in that. I find a certain alleviation of the angst in that. So I
That's
think
brilliant.
he's an individual with a kind and a pure heart who is just simply seeking to attend to the world in the best way that he can and with answers that he thinks will best keep our species on a sure-footed path.
So that's his goal, and if that's it, that if he does, yeah. So he has a goal in your mind.
It feels like that when you read his book. It feels like it is something that's it's nudging our culture to rethink how it how it selects and idolizes the things which it selects and idolizes. We didn't even get into like materialism and that sort of thing, but there's a heavy spirit of that throughout the work as well.
The matter with things, and that's also a double meaning. I think there's a
Mm-hmm.
pun there,
Right. Yep.
and I'm curious to ask him because culture matters,
Mm-hmm.
or does it?
Well,
Uh,
the double meaning applies there too. It matters in terms of the way that we conceptualize meaning, and it matters in terms of the way that we materialize concepts, the way that we manipulate reality, the way that we manage, organize, and manipulate resource. Um, there is a double, a kind of an ironic and double meaning there to that.
that's one of the many reasons why I'm so excited for him and Dr. Peterson to come on the show. I want to share one of the reasons that I'm ex there. I think there's real utility for our listeners, that even this might, I want to say, especially those in business. And this is why. In 30 Days of Thought, there's an alliteration, a constant alliteration between the mentor and the mentee. Every mentor has a mentee and is a mentee to a mentor, and every mentor has a mentee and is a mentee to a mentor, whether they realize it or not. If you want to use a Pageauian sense, there's a
Mm-hmm.
fractalization of that, an infinite fractalization of that.
It's all equational.
So, and that's a recurring thought in 30 Days of Thought. Uh, well, as an advisor to founders who hold the chief executive position and an investor, uh, the relationship in that sense, or whoever the chief is to the board to the chief, the board is an accountability mechanism for the chief to have greater responsibility or ability to respond to known and unknowns, to what is the current makeup of the organization and what can be the makeup of the organization as an organization grows. And growth doesn't happen just growth, growth, growth. There's ebbs and flows to growth. It looks more like uh, an up and down, like mirroring a stock market, how it goes up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. A business is like that, whether it's public or not. It's just that's the business. The universe might be expanding infinitely every second, but the business, uh, how it expands is it is too. It's just not from a materialistic sense. It's more up and down from a materialistic rational sense. Spiritually, and I guess you could say it's expanding no matter what, even if there's because there's customers leaving and going to other businesses and choosing to get services and products, and there's employees that are being employed by other companies having experienced that business, or that coming together of humans around a cause. So now where I'm going with this is so that relationship between the advisor investor to the operating principle of the business and the operating. So now let's say that's master emissary. If you have a board, you need the emissary to act like a master relative to their C-suite, or else they will get uh, coup d'etat by their own partnership structure. Even if that's not their own, let's say the C-suite isn't taking over the business, they just might leave the business because of a tyrant boss and take
Mhm.
half the employees with them. Or if there's a partnership dynamic and the right and the left hemisphere aren't relating to one another, the partners aren't relating to one another in a way that keeps the brain healthy, there'll be a coup d'etat, a power struggle, and the the emissary will kill the master and take over the company. All right. So from a business metaphor, it's super uh, useful, I think, to go through this process and learn from this polymath on these meta conversations.
Mhm.
Look, taking a macro approach at all the like funneling these I guess like using business as a metaphor. I think I can learn a lot from Dr. McGilchrist based on all his learnings and studies of how management works and leadership works, and because the master emissary metaphor is super relevant for business. A disengaged CEO sows the seeds of the resentment of its people to either leave physically or leave psychically or revolt physically and psychically and emotionally. So like that we see this in like a little petri dish in business every day. That's one of that's one of the reasons I'm excited to get inside of his head and hopefully have some practical, not practical, well, yeah, practical, but like epiphanies or creative explorations, and ask him about this as I study the theory more deeply, use the business context to kind of grasp it more thoroughly for myself. And I think elevate our audience's consciousness. Many of the entrepreneurs that listen to the show that are trying to figure out um, their walk in life in business, in life through business, whether they're an employee or the employer or whatever. But
Mhm.
that's one thing that I'm really excited about is, and there's a lot of not there's with yeah, I'll digress for now that on that. There the I when I was read yeah, when I started reading about the right and the left hemisphere, it reminded me of the visionary and the integrator phenomenon that's taken place in business that I have been fighting as an ideology for a couple of years. Because there is no such thing as an integrator. It's when the visionary stops integrating, the culture dies.
Mhm.
And I think the phenomenon in the business self-help teaching world, this overemphasis on the integrator, every visionary needs an integrator, is some pathology as a consequence of what Iain McGilchrist is addressing in this book.
Right.
That's manifesting itself in everyday people's lives, like us, that have small businesses or work for them.
Right. And that idea of the integrator is relative to the goals and notions of the person employing the integrator rather than the CEO or the leader who is the visionary. The leader and visionary, the leader ought to be the visionary and the integrated individual. And from that point down, there's an integrated culture and kind of psychic experience that is competitive in the ways that harmonize more with the natural flows of reality and not necessarily cannibalistically competitive.
But my theory on that is that they actually have an inverse relationship. The self-awareness and
Yeah.
business growth have an inverse relationship.
Self awareness and business growth
Have an
have an
inverse
inverse
relationship.
relationship. So you're saying then that the more
Or integration and business growth. If we're going to use self-awareness in a real term, like it,
well, it depends on the business growth in what context. Like if we've not really quantified the
the
nature
more
of
the
growth,
business grows, the less self-aware the hero.
the less self-aware the hero. Um,
In the absent or the more pressure the, the more the business grows, the greater the call to the ability to respond to the world and outside forces because
right,
there's a compression, there's a tension, there's a psychical, and I think this is what spurred that observation or that intuition and imagination spurred Marx's whole conceptualization is that
mhm,
it's not like, oh, the business growth, that's an unaware leader. No. It's the greater as it grows, the integration of the hero has to be greater and greater and greater and greater. And so
right,
metaphorically, at the very least, we see that in Christ's figurization,
right,
the Son of God is the most perfect, well, yeah,
right,
because like he's leading the whole country. He's the company. He's the leader of the leaders. Like, so of course, it's the greatest suffering for the least uh culpable person.
right.
So that's
But
what I mean by there's an inverse relationship between
yeah,
self integration of the individual and the growth of the company. So the alliteration on that would be that the Abington quote. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Like the the
hmm
the attention that
hmm
comes with power, influence, and authority, or
hmm
authority and
the
power.
awareness of the awareness of that ought to be the thing which that the individual themselves that the I think that the intrapsychic, internal psychological battle of the individual whose ethos or spirit or whatever ought to permeate culture as the organism grows, in order for the organism or the organization, which ought to relatively function as an organism, grows, then the patterns of the culture have to be uh, sewn into that. It's into the fabric of how that's taking place. But as that takes place, that individual has less and less of an ability to one map all the gears and leverage. You're right. There's a compression that takes place through the distribution of the well, the various mechanisms of business, whether it's intellectual property or manufacturing structure stuff, like how the stuff is taking place, all of that is compressed into the organization. Now, the individual himself, though, his own internal, this unaware thing is very interesting. Are you saying that it's
And yeah, as far it's in the rather than an awareness, there's an ideological proclivity that I think McGilchrist is trying to react to
mhm,
in any group, any brand, any
right?
culture, because culture is the actuality and brand is the perception of actuality.
So the idolatry of the individual is un it will happen, but the awareness of the individual, the death to self of the individual is the where the self-awareness has to go away. He has to be lost into the equation of what the organism is. Is that am I fault? I'm trying to really
No,
follow this
this
inverse
is
thing.
well that we're gonna this is gonna this whole series is gonna help me continue to clarify this. But
So basically, what you're saying is if a CEO desires the position of being a CEO for power or fame or money or any type of vainglory motivation, then they're probably pursuing it to ends that will be very unsatisfactory to them.
if inherently in the self that
Hmm.
is a component that's tempered by competence and
Right,
content
right.
acumen. That's all of our heroes' journeys, whether we're in that position or not, in some sense. And it's like, uh, how do we temper that? Well, we do it with knowledge. We do it with, and that's where it becomes that moral
Which
conversation of
is in service, yes, in service of what?
in service of what, and then it ends up bringing us back to these greater metaphysical contemplations.
Right.
Um, um, I guess where I was going though is that for our listeners, and I'm trying. There's definitely business value in attempting to synthesize with McGilchrist business.
Hmm.
I'll use an example. So Peterson was saying to me, um, I'll read a quote that he was saying here. Hold on a second. It was I remember right here. I liked it. It is reward Pareto performers. Those are those that produce the highest amount at the least. A Pareto means high productivity, aligned purpose, right? What that
Hmm.
integrity, intelligence, enthusiasm in a Buffett sense, okay? Pareto performers, the most bought in and competent, let's say that you get the highest reward from the return from them. You follow
Hmm.
in a company. You're clearly the Pareto performer when it comes to uh, the best, the high of the highest quality with the most fair price based on your character, your how you conceptualize the world. Knowing you're going to be a super high quality at a fair price. That makes you the Pareto performer for your company. You're the owner. You're going to do the best damn job that like high value for your
Right.
customers. You're a Pareto performer. They pay you handsomely for the artisan outcome that it will be a consequence of you, Nathan, right? Right? Because
Hmm.
for those that don't know, you do tile.
Right.
Um, so the quote, reward them with expanded responsibility and opportunity, the provision of their own kingdoms. That is the pathway to an organization predicated on subsidiarity, which is the alternative to tyranny and slavery. An organization based on optimized subsidiarity has no upper limits to its productive expansion. There's more than enough for everyone to do and enjoy. Okay. Now that I love the quote, but the actual how of performing subsidiary or creating the preconditions for subsidiarity and then actually modeling out the
Right.
behaviors and rituals and performing the story. What's not in that quote is the inevitability, which is part of my response to the doctor here, Pearson. Well, in a separate conversation. The inevitability that no matter what, there will be a Peter, there
Yeah.
will be a betrayal. And I think McGilchrist is articulating it in a business context for sure. I'm sure in a life context, business is a mirror, fractal mirror of life. There's going to be a Peter, there's going to be a betrayal. And I think McGilchrist is you know what, bringing that to life in this at the end of the introduction that I read in the beginning, the Nietzschean story, that the emissary betrays the master. There's an inevitable betrayal in spite of all efforts made around subsidiarity or performers, or the devil does, you know, is going to say, "Hey, I want to be you," and he's going to be put down by his master. Like the question becomes, how does the master relate to the devil?
Right.
And what consequences are there for the masters, for God's children, because there was a betrayal from the devil? Or like, you know, the CEO that is living out this concept of subsidiarity to avoid being the tyrant, or the slave to their people, the slave to their people, the tyrant to their people, as opposed to as opposed to creating some type of, we're attempting to model the preconditions for there to be no consequences as a person in authority, influence, and power that take one down a notch. No, it's the inevitability that it will occur. The question becomes, how will I relate to that occurrence? Who will I be after in the betrayal? And that will reveal, am I a master over the slave, or that will, yeah, that will reveal, am I the tyrant? Am I the autocratic tyrant or the wise king? The wise king is the slave to God. The autocratic tyrant is a master to themselves and a slave to the devil. I don't know.
In a biographical, yeah, in a biographical sense, the story arc will have a revelation regarding the transpiring of those events, how those events have transpired. But at the same time, not to add a postscript or a caveat to all of this, slavery still exists in the world. Subjugation still exists in the world. All of these things still exist in the world. So while we try and hash out the maybe metaphysical implication of how these stories unfold, there is also still the fact that animation is presupposed by dynamical forces. And so there's this dynamical force thing happening too, where the master and his emissary, and this supreme betrayal, where hemispheric thinking, imbalanced hemispheric thinking, can overtake a civilization or a culture, and how they adopt their ideals and their their idols. Um, it's all still, I think, ultimately subjugated to a grander biological process, which is really only well, how do I want to word this? I think that there are grander story arcs happening that
Mm.
it's all these are attentional models. These are where we're putting our lens of attention. What are we looking at, and how are we looking at these things? Why are we looking at them with the focus that we're looking at them? And then once we uncover some truths there, we have to ask ourselves, now, how does this relate to things on a larger civilizational scale? And that's where that up and down wave thing we were talking about, I think it all kind of
Well,
does that.
if I change my behaviors completely today, then and
Right.
if my attention follows that, then I'm going to be living in a completely different reality than you. If you maintain your same behaviors and attention as you have up to this point that brought us together to have this friendship and kinship. And
Yeah.
I'll explore a completely different reality. And right now, all we know based on our behaviors and our attention and and this conversation as a consequence of many conversations over years, this is just in a vacuum right now. And we don't even know what's actually happening in the world in
Well,
some.
this is happening. This is happening in the world because you are the world. I am the world. I mean, I am reality. You are reality. But relative to other intentional minds that are seeking whatever it is in an animated way that we are seeking whatever it is that we're seeking, we would like to see if there's harmonization there, if there is a tuning, if there's a harmonic tuning, if we're on a frequency that others are on, if there's things to the truths that we're picking at that other people are picking at, and there's ways that cultures and civilizations and businesses and organizations can be helped through looking at their modes of structure and the way that they. I would really love to converse with you sometime about the nature of business. You said business is this fractal relationship to reality. In many ways, I think that business business is a really broad term, and it's kind of subjugated to the the other systems in which it's operating. American business is one thing, business in Dubai is another, business in China is another. These businesses are all relative to the structures in which so it's all nested structures of hierarchies and relationships and all of that, and ideals. Who are we serving? At the end of the day, that's really the question is um, what are the ideals that we're attending to? The thing I was going to say is I would like to discuss with you other forms of business organization. Many of the things in business, as I examine it within American culture, it's global. I mean, the markets really globally have a very similar flavor. Um, feel antiquated to me, and they feel actually counterintuitive to how organisms thrive and prosper in reality. So a lot of these lessons are hard to to transliterate because they're presuppositional dichotomies, if you will, things that are antagonistic to each other.
In closing for part one, and we're going to explore that. I look forward to it. Where do you direct our audience to follow along with us? What would be your advice?
Um, well, that series that I sent you, Dr. McGilchrist did a series on the book, The Matter with Things, with a different neuroscientist, two brilliant individuals, and they kind of go through chapter by chapter and just lay out kind of the information within the books. It's a different flavor than what our dialogue right now is entirely, but they just kind of go through the factual structure of the chapters and lightly address them. I found it to be very helpful just in reading along with the book, just to kind of get their ideas on their written ideas.
Where
So
is this?
it's just on YouTube. If you go to Dr. McGilchrist's YouTube channel, there's a playlist on The Matter with Things, and it's 25 or so videos. I can't remember how many videos, but they just kind of go through the book very lightly. It's not as philosophical as what we've been today. It's just kind of attending to the factual things within the chapters. That or just get the book, get the book and read along. I would actually prefer that someone um, of a superior intellect would get the book, read the book, and then point to me and you in all the ways in which we're misunderstanding it. Because there are no guarantees here that you and I are following along even remotely accurately.
I don't think I know. Well, yeah, I won't know that until I read the
Talk with
book.
him. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely. I agree with that very deeply, and I think some of much of what we've talked about today. That's well, I'll speak. Much of what I've talked about today are things I've been thinking about for some time, and
Mm-hmm.
attempt and trying to bring uh, um, or clarify why we're doing this, how it could be helpful for our listeners, and how it models some of the culture matters values and implicit, and I've tried to make explicit as the show's evolved. And what
Mm-hmm.
I think about this master emissary dichotomy and his general oomph is only from the handful of hours I've spent listening to him at converse with Dr. Peterson and some other interviews at Hillsdale and yeah, just reading the intro to the book and reading the intro to the new book. So I definitely am don't I feel insecure about it. Yeah, but however, I could tend to be
once we get into it, I feel like it's not it's intimidating, but I'm about 250 pages into it of 1500. The
Wow.
Master and His Emissary I've read entirely. I actually listened to it, I think, two or three times a number of years ago. But like I said, this was 2016 or 17, somewhere in
Wow.
there. But the key concepts have stuck with me. But I'm not that far into the book so far. Um, but it's very approachable. There's none of it really thus far that I'm reading and thinking, I don't even understand this at all. So I think as we work our way through it, or however we're gonna go through in chunks of it, um, I hopefully we won't struggle too much.
If you're listening to this, we look forward to seeing you on part two. Pick up The Matter with Things by Iain McGilchrist, volume one and two, and The Master and His Emissary. And go look out for Iain McGilchrist on the Culture Matters podcast. By the time you listen to this, well, it'll be out around that time, a bit after that time. So, or right around that same time. So look out. Just type in the Culture Matters podcast, Dr. Iain McGilchrist, and you'll find that. And follow along with us. And go listen to some of our other episodes with myself and Nathan Merrill, who's a regular on the show. And we will see you next time on the Culture Matters podcast. Thank you.